Remember that YouTube video, Discover Quantum Existence, the one you sent in?
Oh yeah, that was a fascinating one.
It got us thinking, what if quantum physics, all that crazy subatomic stuff, is somehow connected to, like, existentialism?
Yeah, those two seem like worlds apart, right?
Yeah,
Science versus philosophy.
right. But the video makes this case that they're kind of intertwined, that maybe the mysteries of the universe, like how reality actually works, are tied to the whole human experience of, like, meaning and purpose and all that.
Definitely a thought-provoking idea.
So the video dives into some seriously big questions, like, what is reality? Do we actually have free will? And here's the really trippy part. Does just observing the world actually change it?
Those are some heavy hitters. Maybe we should back up a bit, though. Like, to understand the quantum stuff, got to touch on some basic physics first, right?
Yeah, good point. So classical physics, that's like the stuff we learned in school, right? Like Newton, gravity, what goes up must come down.
Exactly. The laws of motion, how objects behave.
And then there's Einstein, EMCA-Hor, which basically means energy and mass are like two sides of the same coin.
That's the gist, yeah. And what's really mind-blowing about EVMCA horror is that it shows how much energy is packed into even a tiny bit of matter. Like, think about nuclear reactions, where a tiny bit of mass gets converted into a massive amount of energy. It's a perfect example of how classical physics explained the universe for a long time.
Okay, that makes sense. But then the video is saying classical physics kind of hit a wall, like it couldn't explain everything.
Right. In the early 1900s, physicists started observing things that just didn't fit the classical model. And that's where quantum physics comes in. It's the physics of the super tiny, the world of atoms, and the even weirder particles inside them.
And that's where things start to get really freaky, right? Like the video mentions this thing called superposition, which, if I'm getting this right, means that particles can be in multiple states at the same time.
You got it. It's as if a single particle is spinning in like a bunch of different directions all at once, instead of just settling on one direction.
Whoa, wait a minute. So you're saying until we actually look at something, until we observe it, it's not actually defined. Like reality is sort of fuzzy until we focus on it.
That's one of the mind-blowing implications of quantum physics, yeah. It challenges our whole idea of a fixed, objective reality.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what if reality is more like a wave of possibilities, and our act of observing kind of collapses those possibilities into something definite?
Whoa, okay. Mind officially blown. And then there's entanglement, which the video makes sound even weirder. It's like particles are linked, even if they're miles apart.
It is strange. Imagine two particles born together, intrinsically linked. You separate them by like billions of light years even, and when you measure the state of one, the other one instantly mirrors it. It's like they have this spooky invisible connection.
Okay, now I really feel like I'm in the Matrix. So in this quantum world, everything's connected in ways we can't even wrap our heads around. That's kind of unsettling, but also kind of awesome. But wait, there's more, right? The video also talked about something called the observer effect, which sounds even crazier.
This is where the connection to like our own experience of the world starts to get really interesting. The observer effect basically suggests that just the act of observing a quantum system, of measuring it, can actually influence its state.
Hold up, you're saying that just by looking at something, we could be changing it. Is reality that fragile, that malleable?
That's the question that's been bugging physicists and philosophers for ages. And while there's a lot we still don't know, the implications are huge. Like, it hints that we might be more intertwined with the fabric of reality than we ever thought.
Okay, I need a minute to process all this. We've gone from apples falling from trees to maybe shaping reality with our minds, and it's only part one. But before my brain explodes, I remember the video didn't stop at physics. It took a hard left turn into existentialism. Like, how does philosophy fit into all this quantum weirdness?
Now that's where things get really fascinating. Think of existentialism as a philosophy that grapples with the big questions about existence. Like, what does it mean to be human? What's our purpose in a universe that seems totally indifferent?
So it's all about those late night soul searching conversations, right? The meaning of life and all that.
Exactly. And just like quantum physics shakes up our ideas about the physical world, existentialism challenges how we experience life,
Yeah.
our assumptions about it all.
Interesting. So they're both kind of asking us to confront uncertainty and maybe even embrace the unknown. It's like they're two sides of the same coin, kind of.
That's a great way to put it. Both quantum physics and existentialism push us to question our preconceived notions about reality and our place in it.
And to think, this all started with a YouTube video. This deep dive is already a wild ride.
All right, welcome back to our quantum existentialism adventure. So last time we were kind of blown away by how quantum physics, totally messes with our understanding of reality, right?
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that whole observer effect thing.
Definitely mind-bending stuff. But
Mhm.
now let's see how all that connects to existentialism.
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. Like, we were talking about quantum particles being in multiple states at the same time, but how does that relate to, actually living life?
Okay, so think about how existentialism is all about freedom and choice,
Mm.
right? Like we're constantly making decisions, big and small, and each choice kind of shapes our path.
Okay, yeah, I get that.
So it's almost like those quantum possibilities we talked about, they're collapsing into the reality we choose with every decision.
So are you saying that, like, every decision we make is kind of like a mini observer effect? Like, we're creating our own personal reality?
Exactly. And just like entanglement, where particles are linked across vast distances, our actions don't just affect us, they ripple outward, you know?
Yeah.
They impact other people, the world around us.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like the butterfly effect, right?
Mhm.
One tiny action can have huge, unexpected consequences. But if reality is this, like, constantly shifting thing, does that mean our choices don't really matter?
That's a great question. And this is where that whole karma concept comes in. Remember how the video brought that up?
Hmm.
It was kind of unexpected, but it adds another layer to this whole thing.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that in there.
Right. But it makes sense because karma basically says that actions have consequences,
Yeah.
even in a universe with so much randomness and uncertainty.
Okay, so it's not about just giving up and saying nothing matters, right?
Yeah.
It's more about understanding that we actually have a responsibility to be mindful of our choices because, like you said, they ripple outward.
Exactly. And that ties back to a key idea in existentialism. Authenticity. Like, we're encouraged to live in a way that's true to ourselves, true to our values, even in a universe that seems kind of indifferent.
Right, so even though quantum physics might say reality is constantly changing, our choices still have weight because they're like expressions of who we are.
Exactly.
That's actually really empowering. But I gotta ask, that whole thing about observation changing things, is that really saying that just by like focusing on something we can influence it?
That's a huge EE question.
Yeah.
And honestly, scientists are still figuring that out. But imagine this. You're watching a pot of water boil, right?
Right.
Does the fact that you're looking at it, that you're observing it, actually have any effect on those water molecules?
I guess on a tiny level, maybe it does.
Exactly. Now, think about that on a quantum scale.
Hmm.
Like, what if our consciousness, our intention, plays a similar role in how particles behave?
So you're saying our thoughts could have a real, measurable effect on reality. I mean, that kind of sounds like, the power of positive thinking and all that. Is there actually any science to back that up?
It's definitely controversial. But some physicists believe that consciousness might be just as fundamental to reality as matter and energy. And if that's true, well then, it's not so crazy to think our thoughts could actually have an impact.
Okay, that's a lot to process. So instead of seeing ourselves as separate from the universe, we're actually participants in how it all unfolds.
That's the cool thing about connecting quantum physics and existentialism. It opens up a whole new way of seeing ourselves and where we fit in the grand scheme of things.
It's definitely making me rethink some things. But here's what I'm wondering. How do we actually apply all of this to, our everyday lives? It's easy to get lost in these big ideas.
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's one we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, I'll leave you with this. If our thoughts and intentions really can shape reality, even in tiny ways, what kind of reality do you want to create?
Welcome back to our quantum existence deep dive. I gotta say, my mind is still like buzzing from all those connections we made between quantum physics and existentialism.
It's a lot to take in, that's for sure.
Hmm.
We've explored some seriously mind-bending stuff, haven't we?
Yeah, for real. But as we wrap things up here, I think the big question is like, what does all this mean for us, in our everyday lives? How can we actually use these ideas?
That's the key, right?
Yeah.
It's all fascinating, but how do we make it practical?
Exactly. So where do we even start?
Well, one big takeaway is that we got to shift our perspective. Like, instead of seeing ourselves as just passive observers, we need to think of ourselves as active participants. Remember, quantum physics suggests that reality isn't fixed, it's always in flux. And existentialism emphasizes the power of choice.
So instead of feeling like we're just stuck with whatever happens, we can actually shape our own reality.
Exactly. We're co-creators of our own experience. Just like the observer effect, our choices and actions influence how things unfold.
That's pretty empowering. But, okay, with so many possibilities, where do we even begin?
A good place to start is cultivating mindfulness, like really becoming aware of our thoughts, our feelings, our actions in each moment.
Mm.
By paying attention to that inner landscape, we can start making more conscious choices. Choices that are aligned with our values.
So instead of just going through the motions, we're actively choosing how we show up, how we interact with the world.
Exactly. And remember how the video talked about our thoughts maybe influencing reality on a quantum level?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's where the power of our focus comes in.
Right. Like we're choosing what to observe in that quantum world. So if we're constantly dwelling on negativity, we might actually be attracting more of that into our lives. But if we focus on gratitude, on possibilities, then we can maybe create a more positive reality.
You got it. It's not about pretending everything's perfect or denying challenges. It's about consciously shifting our perspective and focusing on what we want to create.
Okay, starting to see how this all comes together. But what about when things get tough? Like, life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, right? How do we deal with those difficult moments through this, like, quantum
That's where
lens?
existentialism's emphasis on resilience comes in. Life is full of uncertainties, and facing those with courage and acceptance, that's a big part of the human experience.
So instead of trying to control everything, it's more about learning to embrace the unknown and finding ways to navigate those challenges with, a bit more grace.
That's it. Remember those quantum particles, always in a state of change and uncertainty.
Right.
Well, just like those particles, we humans are incredibly adaptable. We can evolve,
Hmm.
you know. We can change.
This has been such a mind-opening deep dive. We've covered so much ground, like from the nature of reality to the power of our choices to resilience and all that. But what I'm taking away from all this is, honestly, a sense of hope. Like, we actually have more agency than we think. We can actually UEC these ideas to create a more meaningful life.
Couldn't agree more. By embracing that interconnectedness that quantum physics shows us, and that freedom that existentialism emphasizes, we can approach life with a whole new sense of purpose. It's about recognizing that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves,
Hmm.
and that our choices, even the tiny ones, they can create positive change.
This deep dive has been a wild ride, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, I feel, I don't know, inspired. Inspired to make choices that really reflect my values, to focus on the good stuff, and to face those inevitable challenges with courage and an open mind.
That's the beauty of these conversations,
Hey,
right?
Ralph.
It's not just about gaining knowledge, it's about shifting our perspective. It's about opening up to new possibilities. So to everyone listening out there, remember, you're not just a passive observer in this crazy quantum world. You're a participant. Go out there and create the reality you want to see.
That is the perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. And remember, the exploration doesn't stop here. Keep asking questions, keep challenging those assumptions, and keep seeking those connections that make life so fascinating.